Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, which features stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life story for present-day listeners and for the generations to come. Our entire collection is available at voicesofoklahoma.com. By subscribing to our podcast, you will be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. So now listen to another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com.
What is it like to live in a tent? Asked Robert F. Kennedy's 5-year-old daughter, Carrie, when she met LaDonna Harris for the first time in 1965. This exchange between Harris and the Kennedy family resembled many of LaDonna's experiences with the media, the public, and government leaders as she rose to national prominence as a leading advocate of Native American rights. LaDonna Harris is a Comanche Native American from Oklahoma. She founded the Americans for Indian Opportunity and was a vice presidential candidate for the Citizens Party in the U.S. presidential election in 1980 alongside Barry Commoner. She was given access to power in Washington, D.C. because of her marriage to Oklahoma U.S. Senator Fred Harris. To understand what took Harris from the poor farm community where she grew up to the national spotlight, it is necessary to listen to LaDonna talk about the formative years of her childhood. Listen to LaDonna Harris tell her oral history on voicesofoklahoma.com.
My name is John Erling, and today's date is September 21st, 2017. LaDonna, would you state your full name, please?
LaDonna Vita Crawford Harris.
I got to ask you about the name. Vita?
Uh-huh.
What is Vita?
V-I-T-A. My mother named me LaDonna Vita. My older sister said, I don't know what mother was thinking. She named me Billy Carl, then named you LaDonna, which was much more beautiful. Where she heard the name.
And then Tabby Tight is your mother's maiden name, of
That's
course,
right.
Harris. Your date of birth?
2/15/31.
And your present age?
86.
This is one thing I like about this job, because I get to ask women their age, and I have a right to do it.
Well, when you get this old, you don't mind telling me.
You're here on the University of Tulsa campus, and we're in the recording facilities of voicesofoklahoma.com. Where do you live presently today?
In Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Tell us where you were born.
In Cotton County, on my grandmother's land allotment, where the west and east cache come together below her property that I grew up on.
Probably in a farmhouse?
Oh, yes. Yes, one of those traditional houses that they built in that particular time for the Indian community that has a porch similar. We all had similar kind of houses across the country. My grandmother loved flowers and trees, so we had a big yard that we had to maintain. And my grandfather, they raised me. I don't know if you knew that. When I was born was right after the Great Depression, and everybody was still struggling. So my father went to California looking for a job. He was Irish. He went to California looking for a job, and my mother then went to work for Indian Health. And at that time, if you worked in Indian Health, you lived on the campus. So she had to live in a dormitory and stay there to her job. So my sister and I always were with my grandparents, and they were the people who raised me.
I wanted to point out that I think it was actually Temple, Oklahoma.
Yes.
I noticed there were two notable people who came from Temple, Oklahoma, LaDonna Harris and Pepper Martin, who was a baseball player for the St. Louis Cardinals in the 30s and 40s, and he was known as the wild horse of the Osage because of his daring, aggressive base running. So you're right up there with that. Let's talk about your mother. Your mother's name.
Lily Tabitha Crawford.
She grew up in that area?
Yes.
What kind of a personality did she have?
Well, she was real reserved. That population went through this transition from living in your culture to having to go outside of it and work and participate. So I think it was hard on that particular population. She was very good looking, and I had great aunts who were the same age as she was. They all ran together, and they were great flappers. You know, they had that look about them, that haircut and the clothes. She did go to Indian boarding school for a short time, but she didn't like it, and so her mother took her out. But she was rather timid, even when I got older, because she had to make those steps outside of the community that I think really formed her personality.
Mm-hmm. Did you draw As you look back in your life, something from her or your grandmother, maybe that you were raised, mostly your grandmother?
My grandparents, yes.
Yeah.
She would come and visit, and of course, when I got older, she would take me to Lawton, and we would buy great clothes. I was always well dressed between her and grandmother, who made me clothes. But as I got older and really wanted to dress up, a teenager, she would take me and she would get clothes for me, and she took very good care of me in that sense.
Your father's name?
Don Crawford.
What kind of a personality did he have?
See, I never got to know them because he left about the time that I was born. Well, after I was born, but I was an infant, so I never really knew him, though he corresponded with me from time to time. I have letters that my grandmother, his mother, would write to my mother and ask him how I was doing. I didn't know or at least met my Crawford grandmother. I would go and spend a week or two when I was about 5 years old or something that age. I got to know her and my Aunt Otis, who was there with her, and then they moved off too to join my dad in California.
Your mother was Comanche.
Yes.
She was full-blooded Comanche.
Yes.
And then your father, he was Irish descent.
Mm-hmm.
So you're mostly Comanche, but a little bit of Irish. Yes. Is that true?
Yes.
Does the Irish ever
yes.
blossom through?
Yes, it does. It does.
And then you said you have a sister?
Older sister.
She's Billy Carl Evans. So you can trace your ancestry back several generations, I believe. Back to 10 Bears?
Yes.
And what is the story there?
He represented the Comanches in negotiating with the federal government from time to time, so he had a great reputation as an orator. You have to have certain skills, to be able to do that. So he was recognized for that medicine, we would call it, because that was his medicine. He could communicate well, and he represented us on many occasions when we were negotiating with the federal government. Comanches was the last tribe to be brought back to Oklahoma. We have all of these military bases from Arkansas to New Mexico. About every 500 miles was a military installation after the Civil War to make sure that they could get control of the Comanches, Kiowas, and the Cheyennes. And some of the Navajos, they had a Trail of Tears incident as well. My grandmother's people were at Palo Duro Canyon, just south of Amarillo. The military, I can't remember the general's name, but he was well known in the Civil War. They had all these military men like Custer who wanted to make a name for themselves. So this was one of the ways they did it, was to come out after us. By that time, the Comanches had really grown, and they had all kinds of horses. It was stated in some historical documents that every man, woman, and child had at least 500 horses. Of course, we captured them from the Spanish early on, and we became great horse people. That's how we could dominate the Southwest pretty much at one time. So there they were, and they were hiding in the canyon. The general was familiar with how to maneuver them out of that because he heard about the transition. So they brought them up and told them to put what they could carry, and they marched them from Amarillo, Texas, back to Fort Sill. What would happen when they captured some Comanches, they could be in captivity for a while or surrounded by military, and they would be able to steal a horse and run away. So what they did, they ran all of their horses, 7,000 horses, off of the cliff to the canyon, and then they had to walk all the way back to Lawton, Oklahoma. People later in history came and took the bones of the horses to make fertilizer. So that was my grandmother's story. My grandfather has stories too. Of course, grandmother converted to Christianity quite early on, and she was one of the first people to help build the church, the D.O. mission between Lawton and Cache, where her family took their land allotments. My grandfather's father was a Spanish captive by the Comanches who became a great warrior and participated in the Adobe Walls incident. Comanches and Cheyennes were going to Albuquerque to raid, and they ran into this little encampment. So there's a great story about Adobe Walls. Grandfather told me this story, and since we don't have any written history, you have to explain all the environment in which the story takes place. Later on, Fred and I went out and looked at the site, and it was just like grandfather's. You'd almost think that there was a picture taken of it to tell the story that he participated in that incident.
Well, he was a great storyteller then, wasn't he?
Yes,
to be
he
able
was.
to details.
He went to all the great details. It was fun to listen to him.
What a great story to hand down to the generations. You grew up surrounded by very strong women. which must have helped you later on.
Oh, it did. My great-grandmother on my grandmother's side, too, she was a very strong woman. I always admired her. She lived in Cache, and she was surrounded by my great-aunts and uncles. She was so like a queen. She sat in a big chair because she was quite elderly at the time, and she had a cane. I learned to pay attention to elders because they would pet me and tell me how pretty I was or something sweet, and also connect their kinship to me. I needed that kind of affection from them, and so I learned how to behave. And if you laugh, act silly, or talk, they'll send you out to play. So I learned to sit and listen to the women gossip and get to play. She was the matriarch of the family, my great-grandmother, and then my grandmother took the responsibility, and everybody showed her the same honor in different ways. They wouldn't smoke around her. They would behave, and all my great-aunts and uncles and her children as well.
Is there a natural respect for the elderly in the Comanches? Is that
Yes.
inherent of their culture?
Yes, and their knowledge and the fact that they lived so long. If you became older, that means you had good medicine and you lived right.
So there's tremendous respect then of
Yes.
age.
Mm-hmm.
You learn to speak the Comanche language. You learn the culture, traditions of the Comanches, and so you were speaking English and Comanche at one time. You probably still speak Comanche.
I'm very poorly now. Don't use it enough. Only when I'm correcting my children.
This must have been fun as a youngster. You grew up in this large family, and aunts and uncles and cousins and many family get-togethers. It had to be a joyous time.
Yes. We were down in Cotton County, and they were up between Lawton and Cache. But around holidays, we'd make the journey really easy. My grandfather loves to tell that he had the first car in Cotton County. And so here he was, in his braids and his horse cart right hat. And kerchief. He always wore a kerchief. That was his tie, so to speak. So he would drive us, and particularly we had to go to the cemetery for Memorial Day and do all those things. We went back and forth, and then we would have all kinds of cousins come and spend time with us in the summertime down in Cotton County. And the reason we're in Cotton County, when they opened up our reservation in Lawton, all the people came who needed land. So all these people from outside the state who was coming to get land, this is kind of the last opening of lands in Oklahoma. An outbreak of smallpox occurred. So grandmother lost a child and my great-grandmother lost a child. And my captive grandfather went down and selected the property for my grandmother and my grandfather both because they were all involved in all of this loss of life. He remembered enough to put land where there were water, so that's where the Cache Creek, and it also had a natural spring on the property. So he did really well, but then a lot of the Comanche tribal people were in that area as well, so that we had another opportunity to be around Comanche people.
The first house you remember, did it have electricity, plumbing, and all? Tell us about it.
No, it wasn't, and there's a great story of how real electric came about the time I left home, I guess. But it was a fine house, actually. Grandfather would, the only time he really hollered at us was if we didn't shut the gate so the chickens couldn't get in grandmother's yard because she wanted to have grass. A lot of the Anglo people that lived around us, they just swept their yards. She had to have grass and flowers. So one of our chores was to water those plants in the evening. So grandfather would go and draw water and put it in a large tank. And then we would, according to our size, take a bucket and take it and go water her plants. That was one of our activities in the summertime. In the morning, my grandfather would get a watermelon, cantaloupes or something and put them under the tree to keep them cool. So when we'd get through with our chores, he would cut the melon and we'd all sit around and eat and, of course, get juice all over us and be dirty and tired from playing and whatever we were doing that afternoon. So then we'd take a bucket of water and pour it on each other so we could go to bed and not get the sheets all dirty. But it was kind of a ritual. It was just a lovely way to end the day, too. The sun was going down when all this was happening, and you were ready to go to sleep.
So electricity, when it came?
Well, my uncle went and worked in a war plant in Wichita, Kansas. He came back and he took an old windmill and could charge a battery. So we had a battery radio and lights. We had, one light hanging down, but it didn't charge enough. And when we'd walk from the school bus to come home from school, we'd listen to the radio. It was during World War II, of course. And grandfather was listening real close because I had an uncle in Germany. And He followed the war. It was interesting how he could interpret it. He could tell you where the troops were and what they were doing. He was a great admirer of General MacArthur. And, of course, we were all involved in the war. We would look for planes and like when the enemy might come, just in case. My uncle, my grandmother gave him some land and he built a house, and it was close enough that we could walk back and forth, the children anyway. So I had 3 cousins over there, one the same age as myself. We would dress up like Nyoka of the jungle or something and go down play on the creek. And our little cousin got into the war too, but he was a Japanese, and he would attack us occasionally. We played on the creek all day long till we got hungry and come home. It was fun growing up, and in the summertime we always had a house full of cousins and the like.
Referring to the war, 1941, December 7th, you would have been 10 years old. Do you have any recollection of that day or hearing about it?
Yes, because we had the radio at that time, and neighbors came over to listen to it. And, of course, the charge didn't last, the battery didn't last that long, but we would come home from school and we would want to listen to the Lone Ranger or whatever serial was on, and Papa would come in and say, "Get away from there, you kids." And Comanche was telling us that he had to listen, about the war so that he would be informed, I guess. One of the reasons, too, he was in what they called Troop L, which was an all-Indian troop made up of Comanches, Kiowas, and Cheyennes. When they brought them to Fort Sill, some of the younger men were running off and stealing horses from the Texans. Texas sued us one time to try to get paid for the horses that we stole. So in order to stop it, Scott, I've forgotten what his title was, but he was head of Fort Sill at the time. And he came up with the idea of having an all-Indian military group to keep those younger people occupied, too. The uniforms were like World War I German uniforms, really elaborate. Papa became one of them. None of them could speak English, and they couldn't speak each other's language. Some they could communicate with, the Kiowas particularly, and they had to give the commands in sign language. So it's a real historical role that he played at that time, which saved Fort Sill, and all the other forts then were closed down that were from Arkansas to Old Mexico.
So they had an active role then?
Yes, And fortunately, the Mexican War, the war with Mexico, they were just getting ready to send them over to fight in that war, and it came to an end. So he missed active fighting.
I think you mentioned earlier it was your grandmother who joined the church. Tell us about that experience. What denomination was that?
It was Northern Baptist. The Southern Baptists hadn't found us. It was a federal government policy to encourage different denominations to come and recruit us, I guess. And they came in great numbers, so we had all kinds of denominations.
These were missionaries then, I guess.
Oh, yes.
Coming to you, and that's how the Baptist church was started. Did they try to change your culture?
Well, our church wasn't as bad about that, but I didn't like the first preacher who came because he would say, "Grandfather is going to go to hell." And I knew that wasn't so because he was a good person. He did all these wonderful things. But grandmother helped start a church in Walters. We had a little church there, and most of us were related. They'd cleaned up an old factory kind of plant that was on one of the tribal lands and one of the family homes, and they cleaned it up, and that's where we went to church later. Though he was Anglo, he and his wife both got involved with Comanche culture. They translated hymns. His wife could sing the songs, Mrs. Ho. She had a little portable piano that she could carry around, and she would play the piano. So we had a wonderful thing, but Papa would sit outside. He would drive us to church, but he would sit outside and maybe smoke a cigarette. Maybe that might be the only cigarette he would smoke for a month or a week or so, and wait for us very patiently. And then we'd go home, and he would sit out and sing his peyote songs on the front porch and watch the sun go down.
So in that church, it was a combination of Comanches and whites?
No, the congregation was all Comanches.
All right. But in your church, there was some discrimination that went on.
Yeah. I felt it anyway.
Who was discriminating against you?
Well, the minister, basically, like the minister who was at Dio Mission, because he was saying that the culture was bad, preaching that kind of thing. So I felt that was a discrimination, and I've always felt that way. As a child, I felt that they were talking against grandfather, and what he was sharing with us was so beautiful, and then this person says that was all wrong.
So the first discrimination you ever were aware of was in church.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, you have blue eyes, lighter skin than many Native Americans, and then you realize at an early age that actually made a difference.
Yes, it did.
Did some people think you weren't Native American?
No, they all knew, because in Temple, we went to school at Temple.
All right.
You know, there were little tacky names and teasing every once in a while. But my cousin put an end to that. Somebody was calling us the gut eater, and she ran over and picked him up and threw him down. So he quit saying things like that. But I went home to grandmother and was all upset about it. She said, "Oh, sister, you have to understand he doesn't know any better. He's pitiful. Just think of him, because he didn't know anything about Indian people. He didn't know anything about Comanches particularly. He's uninformed, so he's a bless your heart." In Oklahoma, we love to say, if they're acting out or something, well, he can't help it, bless his heart. So I learned that at a very early age, which is in all the work I've done, helped me see when I was in Washington, bless their hearts, they don't understand us at all. So it helped me not to be angry. She said, "Don't get mad, because you're losing when you get mad. So figure out why that person is acting that way, and if they're wrong, you can say, well, bless their heart. Don't be mad because you've been beaten by that person, because they're able to make you angry."
I think we say, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Yes.
So that's the concept of that, right? You quoted as saying, "I filter everything through Comanche values."
Yes.
And you've done that your entire life.
Yes.
But you were baptized in the church.
Yes, only to satisfy my grandmother. I was the only child that hadn't been baptized in the whole church. So I finally gave up and was baptized in a horse trough.
Did you regret ever doing that, thinking, well, I didn't do it for me, I did it for others?
Yes, I absolutely did. I didn't take it as you would as someone who was giving themselves to that. But it was because I'm afraid I was embarrassing grandmother, because she was so well thought of in the community and by the ministers as well. So
the Depression started in 1929, continued to the end of the 30s. Do you remember, would it have had any effect on your family?
Well, for some reason, it didn't seem to affect us. Yeah. I don't know exactly why.
But I suppose you were growing your own vegetables and food, and you always had access to food, and that was one of the things, obviously, people would be standing in line to get, but you had that.
Mm-hmm. And because of the land that this great-grandfather chose for us, it was quite productive, and we could grow crops on it that put us through the years, and we had animals, pigs and cattle and horses and dog and cat. So it was a very well-working farm, and grandmother always had a major garden. That's one of the things I remember so well of her. When she became older, I would be her horse, and she'd hook me up to the little garden plow, and I would pull it for her, and she'd make her rows and plant, and we always had fresh vegetables. We were really well off in relative terms. Several times I remember people coming through the county. We had a house that was sharecroppers that had built a little house that we're helping grandfather and my uncle farm. They left. They found something that got better off. And so grandmother wanted a brooder house for her little chickens. Then we got the other half, my aunt and I, and it was our playhouse. So when these people came through looking for work, if they stayed to work for us, they stayed in our little playhouse. We'd fixed it up like a real house. I remember that so well, and wondered what happened to them after they left us, because grandmother went on a big way of feeding them and being generous to them.
Well, you learned a lot from those role models, didn't you? I can't help but thinking to myself how you never ever had to wonder if you were loved.
That's right.
And then you've met a lot of people in life and seen children who always wondered if they were loved. Yes. And you never had that feeling. No.
One time I doubted myself, and I tell the story. I don't know if it's in the books that you read, but when I was in the first grade going to school, I was scared to death going to school. So when I got to school here, I thought everybody was kin to me. Everybody that was Comanche was kin to me. So I had all of these relatives. I went to school, and the first grade reader was Dick and Jane. Here's what American families, we were told that by the teacher and by the book. A mother, father, a son and a daughter and a dog and a cat.
Mm-hmm.
You probably had
Yep,
it too.
I did, right. I can see those pictures right now.
And I thought, that's not me. I couldn't see myself in the story. And it just worried me. And I thought, well, I don't have a mother and father who live with me. So I worried about it for some time. I kind of got mad at my mother. She went off and left me. So I went through a transition. Then I came to realize that I really had a great life, that I had all these relatives. And I think being a Native American, indigenous person, is you know that you have this support and this communal society that keeps you together. When there's a rub on that, we have problems. That helped me overcome it. And then I started hearing some from my father and felt better about it. I didn't have any image of him, but I did my mother, and I was angry at her for a few months. That image got blurred for a while there. It took me a few months to get over that. I would lay on the porch and be angry at mother, and then I decided, she had to make these major changes, come from this loving home and then have to go out on her own and not really educated. She went to school, but I don't know how many grades that she went through and went to work for the hospital.
What was your dream as you were growing up? Did you have anybody talking about college or anything like that?
No. The white picket fence was my dream. The house and being a wife and mother and having children. That's what my dream was. I can remember the white picket fence, because you learned that in school too. And that was what I imaged would be successful.
Didn't you have a difficult time learning because you're dyslexic?
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
Well, being dyslexic, you can't read and you can't spell because you take information. A lot of people, I think Einstein was, people like that were dyslexic. But what you see gets translated or muddled in your brain. And I thought I was so dumb because my aunt, we went to school together and she was a year older and a grade higher than myself, that I couldn't spell. My first experience in school, what I did, I memorized the word, and also because of the little spot or turned corner or something, I found a way to satisfy the teacher without really doing what was expected of me. All through school, I did that same thing. I would study the teacher and figure out, that she wanted this kind of information, and I would give it to her more verbally, and she would get after me after the test. Mostly they were women. The tests I would take, said, you can't spell. And said, why don't you go back and try to learn to spell? Because people didn't know what dyslexia was at the time. And I just thought I was so dumb, and I'd ask my aunt, how do you spell so-and-so? We're doing homework. And she'd say, oh, look it up in the dictionary. And I said, if I could look it up in the dictionary, I wouldn't ask you how to spell it. So it was really hard to be doing school, but I learned how to satisfy my teacher enough that they knew that I knew the subject.
So by the time you got into high school, you pretty much had that mastered.
Yes.
And it was not to hold you up through high school at all.
That's right. And then I had time to be involved in school activities. I was in the glee club, and the band would get to go to the football games. And so a friend of mine and I said, well, how could we go with the band? So we talked them into letting us be the flag girls that would parade around with the flags and wear the little white boots and all of that and get to go to the ball games. So we have to figure out how to do things in a different way, but do it that fit what people needed and wanted from us.
I just want to mention this. I know you were raised to be maybe politically aware and point out that Indians were not allowed to vote until the passage of the 1924 Indian Civil Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, in this day and age, it's harder for us to believe that.
And being the first people of the land, too, grandfather took it real seriously. And, of course, Roosevelt was his idol in politics. We'd go to vote. As soon as the doors were open to vote, we had to go about 3 miles to the voting place. We'd go and we'd play in the yard while our folks voted. But we grew up thinking that President Hoover's first name was goddamn, because that was what Grandpa said. But we grew up thinking that President Hoover's first name was because that was what Grandpa said. Only he would curse him every once in a while. When he had a bad day, he would come in. Boy, when Roosevelt died, I remember that very vividly in school, how it affected the whole school system, and then going home and Papa it was so sad. He became, again, tied to the radio. And, of course, he ran away from Indian boarding school, so he would say to me every once in a while, "Granddaughter, I wished I could write." He could draw his name, sign checks and things. My mother and my sister bought Look magazine and Life magazine for him. So he would call me over and say, "Now tell me who these people are." And I'd tell him. So he would listen to the radio. Then he could visualize. And, of course, not having a written language, you have to use your creative imagination a lot. So he followed the war like that. And grandmother came to visit me in Washington, and she had met Lady Bird Johnson when she was campaigning for Lyndon and McAllister, as a matter of fact. So she, being the Comanche that she was, she gave Mrs. Johnson a shawl. Mrs. Johnson said, "Well, when you come to Washington, Miss Tabitha, I want you to come visit me at the White House." So she came, first time she ever flew. It was just a wonderful thing. And, of course, all of the senators wanted to meet her, and they all made over her, and we took her to the Senate dining room, and Vice President Humphrey was make over her quite.
Okay, so you had already been in Washington by that time.
Oh, yes,
okay.
I jumped on you there.
Let's get you to Washington, because in high school you met somebody
yes,
by the name of
Fred Harris.
Fred Harris. And didn't he run your campaign for Turkey Queen?
Yes, and I lost. I held it against him.
It was the first of many campaigns that the two of you were involved in. You were married out of high school or shortly?
Yes, right out of high school. His folks lived in Lawton, and I had come up from Walters and catch a bus and come up, and my mother would drive me out to his folks' farmhouse, and then he would catch a ride and come down, and that's how we kept up our relationship for so long, and then decided, well, this is not going to work. Let's get married. So we did.
Are you close in age?
Yes. He's just months older. Let's see. He's November and I'm in February.
Okay. So you're basically the same age.
Mm-hmm.
You get married, and then what happens? Fred goes to school?
Well, he went to college. See, he was a year ahead of me. I had a period of living with a great aunt and my sister in Bethany. So I spent the summer with my sister, and then I stayed and went to school at Putnam City. And I dated the student body president. Oh. So when I went to Walters, the war was over, everybody was coming home. I went back to Walters. My aunt and I went to school there in Walters. I asked her, I said, "Well, who's the student body president?" And she said, "Freddie Ray, standing over there." And I said, "Oh." He impressed me. He told me he had a job at the Walters Herald and that he had cattle, had 2 cows, and he was a chicken judger. They showed me his ribbons. I was so impressed. He had won so many ribbons for different kinds of chickens that he showed. That impressed me, and he was a big FFA scholar, and he won a prize for his speech in high school. The FFA teacher and his wife invited me to go. He had to speak in Dallas for the regional, and he won the regional, but lost the national.
You were talking about Fred all the
time.
Fred,
yes. He always said he's going to be a lawyer. So when we decided we were going to get married, he was already a year in college. So we went to OU. We were housed in one of the houses where, after the war was over, the returning military, it was a pretty skimpy little trailer-type house that was a little bigger than that and had a communal bathroom that did have laundry rooms right across from the stadium. It was really kind of exciting. He was working as a printer. I got a job working in the library. Did that for a long time until we had our child. And then I babysit for the military children that were in our compound. Then they closed that down and built something for the athletic department. And we went and rented rooms off of a floral shop. We made a deal with her that if we did some work for her, she would discount the rent. We really wanted funerals because she really needed help for funerals to put the flower arrangements all together. We thought that was really weird of us to do that. My daughter went to nursery school, and then a woman who worked at the nursery school said that she was taking 4 of those young children to her farmhouse right outside of town. And would I be interested? I said yes. I asked my daughter because she wasn't really happy where she was at. So this turned out to be just great. She was so wonderful and just had all this great care. Fred and I both working, and of course he was so smart. He was a straight A student and top in his class. And everybody came to study at our house because of Fred's notes and having discussions. Even in law school, it was the same way. So I always said we went to college because I was exposed to all of that. And then he would try out some of his theories or what he learned in anthropology or about the trees, and he would tell me what the leaves were, and I would help memorize them too, so he could go through that before he had his examinations.
You knew the material as much as he did when he went out the door to take his test. What year are we talking about approximately when he was at OU?
It was late 40s, I think.
Okay, so this time period is the late 40s that we're talking about. Then Fred graduates from OU. How does he decide to run for the state legislature?
One of the lawyers who went to law school with him, they were going to start a law firm. Then he got drafted for the Korean War. His partner did, but Fred, because he had a child, wasn't recruited. So we went to Lawton, and he started with a law firm that was already organized real well. They were great people, and they certainly helped me socially get acquainted in the community. But we did all the things that you're supposed to do when you become a citizen of a community. He joined a club, which is totally unlike him, but he got a lot out of it, Elks Club. And then I joined an older women's group, Lawton Women's Forum. That was what the organization was called. They kind of took me under their wing, too, because they didn't have young people in. And we joined the Historical Society, and we lowered the average age of the board to 60 years old because we were so young. But they were so pleased because we were interested. Then, of course, we saw a lot of my folks. In our first house, my mother was about 2 blocks from us, and my in-laws, Fred's folks, were more than 5 blocks away. The children grew up with family all the time.
Let's name your children.
Okay, Catherine is the eldest, Catherine Cornell Pedenge, and Byron Harris,
and then
Laura.
And Laura works with you now.
Yes.
So Fred is...
You asked me about how did he get interested. Well, when we went to Lawton, then he was starting his law practice. Our state senator died. By that time, we'd been there about a year. There was a lot of talk who was going to run. The state representative announced that he would. So Fred was talking to his law firm and our banker who had become a social friend, and they said, why don't you run, Fred? Because he was a big Democrat, head of the Democratic Party and the student at OU. His dear friend was head of the Republican Party, and they would have a little radio show and talk about the state legislature. So he had that kind of reputation before he left school. So they encouraged him to run, and he did, and won that seat, the state legislature. He had lived there a long time and was well known, but something about the way we campaigned worked.
It was a team, wasn't it? You were out there working.
Yeah.
This jumped out at me. They referred to the two of you as Freddie and the Indian.
That's
Did you take that
No.
all right? Or
Yes,
not?
I took it all right. It was an older state senator. He was trying to be affectionate. He was just so burly Eastern Oklahoma guy, a kind of rough cowboy-looking kind of guy. And so when Fred was elected, of course, we had been so close all through law school and going to a new community, and now he was doing this. He would say, come up to the legislature. He was so wise. He had studied all about what was required of a senator, and he was the youngest senator that had served at the time. So Don Baldwin, who was the president of the Senate, asked him to share a common living room at the hotel. They both had rooms and then had a sitting room. He would invite me up at that. I could sit in a chair by his desk. And it was fascinating. And then his committees, he wanted me to come hear his committees. So I would find a babysitter. I had great aunts who would come and babysit for me, who lived in Cache, and they loved to come and take care of the kids. I would go and stay a couple of days. I was the only wife that did that. I was the only woman around, and they all came to see Don Baldwin because he had so much political power. It was during the dry days of Oklahoma, and they would bring some alcohol. So I would mix drinks and act as a hostess to their little common living room. So it'd be time to go to dinner. This big old senator said, well, why don't we ask Freddie and the Indian to go have dinner, take them out to dinner. So we'd go to dinner, and some of the younger senators said, quit bringing your wife around all the time. But he became dependent on me to interpret people for him. So that's what I did. I would sit around and listen, and I was very comfortable, and they would be comfortable with me. They became comfortable with me. They weren't accustomed to it. But they took me in, and we would go and have dinner when I was up there and do something with them. I loved the state senate. I just really liked it. It was so intimate.
Right. As I hear you being so outgoing, there was a time, though, when you were younger, you were kind of stoic and maybe shy and not ready to come out of your shell?
It was hard to, and he helped me, basically.
So Fred helped you do that?
Well, he recognized, and then we read up on my disability. He was very sympathetic. And being in Lawton, in a new town, and getting acquainted, we depended on each other to introduce ourselves to each other's friends. Mm-hmm. So we became a couple there. And then we started integration of Lawton.
Right. I just want to make an observation here, because all these people were taken with you, too, as a couple.
Yes.
Because you had the kind of personality. They weren't as much taken with you because you were Native American as when you got to Washington.
That's right.
That was a big draw. But here it was based on your personality.
And, of course, you have to remember, television had just come in. No women were in any state legislature, so there weren't wives around. I was there, and I was accepted by the older members of the Senate because they just liked me for one thing.
You had charm, let's face it. I'll call it what it is, okay? You were living in Norman in the early 50s.
Yes.
And you got introduced to civil rights and the discrimination.
Yes. Oh, yes. When we came out with the law of equal but separate.
Yes.
What OU did in the law school, where Fred was there at the time, they had a rope, velvet rope, that all of the students were over here, and then this one African American sitting there. That was separate but equal. That was bending the rules, really. OU was trying to do something, but it looked and felt so terrible, isolation like that.
And then, of course, Ada Lois Sipewell challenged that in court.
Yes.
And she, too, felt that discrimination. I've interviewed her son about that and how she would come into the classroom thinking that she was going to sit anywhere. No, you have to wake up to the top and sit by yourself. But that was challenged. And so when you heard about all the discrimination of blacks, you didn't hear much about the discrimination towards Native Americans. Mm-hmm. Did that bother you?
Well, I came to understand it. I always say that it was open discrimination against black people, but it was more subtle about Indians. Everybody in Oklahoma was part Indian. They claimed to be part Indian, so that you didn't openly discriminate like separation. I think they did in the real early times, but by the time I came along, we were accepted. But we learned later that 75% of us were dropping out of high school. So we didn't know what we could do. That was when we started Oklahomans for Indian Opportunity. But back to, we were talking about discrimination. So it was covert discrimination where it was overt to African Americans.
I got to say, my father would say politics was in church, but it was so fine. You couldn't really see it, and that's what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Sometimes that's tougher to fight.
It is.
Than the one that's so blatant.
That's right, because you blame yourself. Something's wrong with me. Because we're proud to be Native American in Oklahoma, and look at our seal, look at our flag. Everything is, we're part of it. But then, so something must be wrong with me. It was so subtle. It was very hard to do and harder to, as you say, overcome. Well, we learned some strategies later on.
Did you feel discrimination even as you and Fred were marching on your way to Washington and running for election?
There was one club I wanted to join in Lawton when I first moved there, and they didn't accept me. So
really,
I was really taken back by that. That's when I joined the older club, women's club.
And you knew it was because you're Comanche? Mm-hmm. Or any Native?
Any Native. And I had really great supporters who were nominating me, but they turned me down, so...
Fred runs for governor and he loses.
Yes.
Let's move ahead. He then decides to run for the Senate in 1964, and here is this young whippersnapper running against Bud Wilkinson, the former coach of OU.
Our great white hope.
He was the great white hope. He could have been president of the United States. What made Fred think he could run and win against him?
He just believed in himself. And no one gave us a chance. I mean, when they talked about it, all the old pros, because he was so well liked. And he had his television show. He made more money than the president of the college. He was everybody's darling because he helped us get past our Okie syndrome about having to leave the state for California. the depression that the state went through. And so he was kind of the new image of Oklahoma. And he became a national personality from being a good coach. But Fred was convinced he could do this. So he talked to different people. We sit down and we talked to everybody available because Kerr's death.
Senator Kerr died.
And that's why there was a special election.
Yeah.
So it was a strange campaign. It was hard, but we went to every town in Oklahoma. He went to every town. I went to half of it with him. And then I could tell that my children were getting needy, and I'd go home and be mother for a while and then come back. And I was confronted. I would ask people to vote for him, and one woman got after me and said, "What are you doing in politics?" And I said, "I'm supporting my husband." That's what I'm doing. But, it wasn't all that accepted for the role I played.
You were a female, though,
yes.
Being involved.
Yes.
That's what that woman
was remarking.
Right.
And he would always, when he would do his little television political speech, invite me to come on and introduce me. I wouldn't say anything. I would just be there. So that just became the way we operated. And then his classmates at law school, we were so close, they were the ones who made a commitment that he would take out a loan from our bank, and they would commit like $25 a month or something to the campaign to pay off our campaign debt. And everybody thought we had Kerr money because young Kerr, one of the Kerr men, were for us. And then one of his staff helped him organize throughout the state. He knew political people in each town, and we would drive there, and they were already notified we were coming, so we'd have a gathering to shake hands and find a person who would lead that particular community. And we just outworked him. That's how he really won it. And then I think the telling speech at the closing of the campaign. Well, the other thing, too, President Kennedy appointed Wilkinson head of physical activities for youth.
Right.
He did that for a Democratic president. Mm-hmm. He was so well thought of, but he was more conservative than everybody thought, politically conservative. So one of the things Wilkinson did, used the Roman Empire collapse because it had too many social programs. That was one of his statements. So Fred at a big rally here in Oklahoma City said, my opponent said but why they really collapsed was all the athletic or the shows that they put on in the arenas. That was what caused the collapse of the Roman Empire. And it got news, and then Vice President came and he helped Fred.
Hubert Humphrey.
Hubert Humphrey. He became our great champion then and was our lifetime friend. And then Johnson was coming, but he had been discouraged about doing anything with Fred. We couldn't set up anything. We came to the fair in Oklahoma City. But he was going to meet with other elected officials. So Fred's press guy just put the phone, his speaker, in front of the president and says, "What are you going to do for Fred Harris?" And he said, and kind of got him off guard. And he said some great Texas thing, said, "Well, we'll win this race and take the coon skin and hammer it on the door and bring home the bacon." I mean, a whole bunch of things like that without saying I'm going to support him. He said all these things, but it came out as a support, that we used it as a support. And then we had little Harris headliner dresses, and Wilkinson had all these women folk in real tailor-made clothes. So we came out with our little handmade dresses. When we were trying to think of a slogan for the women's group supporters, we were saying, what rhymes with Harris? And we came out, harlots, Harris harlots, and we came up with crazy things like that. So headliners became, and they got prints of Fred talking to Johnson and different kinds of headline stories where Harris did this or Harris did that. And that was our Harris headliners. And our children wore clothes. We had a song. And my grandmother got involved, my Comanche grandmother. She loved it. Cowboy Pink Williams was the lieutenant governor at that time. We said, "Well, Kaku, what did you like most about campaigning?" And he said, "I like that pink cowboy." But she really got into it.
Yeah, that had to be a lot of fun. And I meant to point out that Fred talks about that whole campaign in his oral history here on voicesofoklahoma.com if you want to make a reference to that. So to have defeated Bud Wilkinson, who, as I understood, never wanted to talk about football when he went out in the X and O's, which is what people wanted to hear from him, and he then, and it's probably a poor decision on his part not to talk that way.
That's right. Let me tell one more thing about what we did was different, too. We got women involved. We realized that women haven't been involved. And so, for instance, using his classmates in law school that would have coffee clutches, and women would come. When women were involved, you would change the attitude of men who thought they knew all about campaigning and wanted to tell you what to do. They would behave differently. So it's the first time that women were involved in the campaign in a way that just made that kind of difference. Mm-hmm. That's how we got around, and I think how we won it.
When does Oklahomans for Indian Opportunity come in this story? Did it come before you went to Washington?
Yes, oh yeah.
Didn't you organize it?
Yes.
All right.
Well, it came out of my experience integrating law for African Americans.
Okay, and out of that integration,
I learned some techniques,
in Norman came Oklahomans for Indian Opportunity. What was that about, and why was it formed?
We had heard 75% of our children were dropping out of school in the western side of Oklahoma. So we said, why is that? They must feel some form of discrimination, so we've got to figure out how we can help them, work with them. Our first attempt was to look at our children, and we interviewed them. When we interviewed high school kids, if they made it to high school, they couldn't tell you how they made it, what they went through to get there. So we invited younger children, and they could tell you, said, well, we can't make straight A's. They believed they couldn't make A's. And we said, well, that young woman sitting next to you can. But the way they were talked to by their teachers, and I don't think the teachers intended it to be, but some way they picked up negative energy.
Well, isn't it true that some teachers would call the Indian children squaws and actually use Indian names to make them feel inferior?
Chief
Right. So then the young Indian children saw themselves as the whites saw them.
Yes. And that was the difference. When I say it was passive aggression, that was harder to deal with. And how do we help change that? So what we did, I visited all the schools and took books. There weren't that many books about Indians, but there were some really great books to these schools' library. We'd give them a gift of books, and I would talk about, now everybody should learn, because this tribe, whichever the major tribe was where I was, is here, and said, you ask your Indian friends what they know about their tribe. If they don't know, then you go and read that book. And said, you Indian kids better know about your culture and your tribe, because your friends are going to be asking you about your tribe. Just doing that and paying attention. The superintendents were embarrassed. We came over in eastern Oklahoma, and they had a young, one of the major tribes, I think he was a Choctaw, and they had a big Indian headdress, which was totally inappropriate for the tribe, but he didn't know. The young man was embarrassed to death. But that's the kinds of things we did at first, and said, okay, that if you do something in your own community or in your clubs that you organize, or do something in school, then the group can pick someone to go to OU, and we will have OU Day. The Lieutenant Governor, George Nye, would come, and we made it an Indian Appreciation Day and give them little certificates because they'd done something in their own communities, and recognizing that and exposing them to the campus and having people talk to them about college. And it seemed to work. Well, it didn't work the first time because we said anybody could join that club. So we made it exclusively Indian club. Then that worked. We weren't afraid to make mistakes because there wasn't any literature to go by or to use. So it worked. That was our first project, and we organized the western side of the state. We went to each of the communities where the large Indian population and organized that. And then we took on commodities. So many people were on commodities, particularly over in eastern Oklahoma. And we organized these women to make a cookbook of how to improve what you could add to the commodity to make it more.
And once you explain commodities.
Commodities were food that people that were low-income people could ask for them if they qualified for their income level.
And what was it?
Cheese, butter. It was great agriculture products that were overproduced. Cheese, big old wonderful cheese and butter. But there was canned meats that turned people off, so that was what they had to work on, how to change that meat into some more attractive.
So you were able to come up with recipes to make it tastier.
So that organized the parents a little bit, too. And then we started a pig farm, trying to look at economics. We organized the western side of the state and came over to the eastern side of the state. And at that time, the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, appointed their leader. Oh, we were so shocked because we'd been for 20 years or so electing our own fighting about it, but we elected our own chairman and chief, whatever term. So they were shocked to find that out, and immediately turned it around. We got in a bit of trouble because I found out that members of the Congress also, what district they were in, would help choose with the Bureau of Indian Affairs the leader. I didn't even know that, but in letters that Fred got afterwards in his papers in Oklahoma University, that we read some of those letters at how we were coming in here, and some people over in eastern Oklahoma called us communists. Yeah. Because we were organizing the kids. We had youth groups, and it was just wonderful. Then after we went to Washington, we had Sarge Shriver down. We had Fritz Mondale, Senator Mondale. We had, head of the Health and Human Services for the administration. Anyway, we had great national people come down, and that gave them more confidence. And then Bobby Kennedy came down. We told the kids at the school that they could invite one or two of their fellow classmates to come, so it gave them prestige in their school because everybody wanted to come and see Bobby Kennedy. So we decided that since we learned how to work over here in eastern Oklahoma, we should have a statewide organization. So we organized the first statewide organization for Indian Opportunity.
OIO, as it became known. Mm-hmm. Does that still exist today?
No.
But you did a tremendous amount of work through that.
It just was marvelous what we accomplished. We changed the dropout rate from 75 to 35 in that period of time, just giving them some identity and some pride about themselves, and talk about it. It's all right to be an Indian and enjoy your culture, and people talk to you in your language.
At some point, somebody said to you, "What Indian problem?"
Yes.
What Indian problem? And
because they didn't see it, and it's one of the hardest things to overcome. We had the children played the teacher, the Indian children, and then teachers played the Indian children. The kids then talked like what they thought the teacher was saying, and the teachers just started crying. They didn't realize what they were doing. Yeah. So we stopped that real quick. Taught us a lesson, and we learned from it because we didn't know.
Absolutely. So you go to Washington, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, he was befriending you right there.
Yes.
You were welcomed by the Robert Kennedys. They lived near you in Virginia. And the Knothole Gang, Bobby Kennedy, Fritz Mondale, Joe Tidings from Maryland, all elected at the same time. You met with Senate wives. You met Ethel Kennedy, invited to their home, to Hyannisport. I mean, and it all took off.
Just like that.
And wasn't it partly because, yes, while you were an engaging personality, you were Comanche, and they were taken with the fact that you were Native American?
Yes.
Was that true?
That's true.
So you had both of these things going
for us, yes. Then because of my activity in Oklahoma, I had been involved in mental health and other things, and of course civil rights. Well, Shriver then became a good friend. And at the time that the war and poverty programs went here in Oklahoma, instead of going directly to the Indian tribes like they were every place else in the country, they were going to the county. And the county, who probably had the most prejudice against the community, wasn't sharing any of the resources of the War and Poverty Program with it. So we changed that. I was an advisor to Shriver. I did all the things that Senate wives should do, is make bandages. The other senator, Mike Monroney's wife, was the most outstanding of the Senate wives on making bandages. She came in at a different time, period of history. She was a little bit older than I just was appalled that they were using all this energy to do this. And of course, the Vietnam War was on, but we didn't even have anyone talking to us. It was just kind of, you went there and made these bandages and left. I did it all. And then I got involved with Shriver.
Sergeant Shriver, we should point out, was husband of Eunice Kennedy.
Kennedy, yes.
And he was a Peace Corps.
And the War and Poverty Program that Head Start was a part of. So he asked me to testify before the House of Representatives for funding for the War and Poverty programs. And I said, oh, gosh, yes. What the War and Poverty did helped the Indians. The people who became community organizers then organized their own campaign and became chairmen of their tribes. So we had this network of people that kind of had the same experience. But the other thing, I was involved in the integration of Lawton. That got out. Of course, the way we campaigned as well, the African-American community and our local people at home in Lawton recommended that I be made an honorary member of a Black national sorority. So I was accepted. It's all the work that I did here that helped me when we got to Washington, that people came to me and said that we want to honor your work. Mental health, I got involved in mental health because Fred was on the statewide mental health Senate committee. I toured all the mental health hospitals. I worked with the National Institute of Mental Health and got a reputation that way. Something about it, what worked for Oklahoma, really.
It prepared you.
Yeah.
There is a plan, isn't there?
Yes, it was. And then the friendship of the Kennedys. I'll tell you one story about the Kennedy family. Ethel had me over for lunch one day with Art Buckwall.
The notice columnist, Art Buckwall.
He was also a humorist as well. Mm-hmm. Ethel was a very good Catholic woman, and she gave grace. And she asked Buckwall to it. This is so Ethel. She said, Art, who do you pray to? He's Jewish. And he said, Ethel, we had him before you all did. At the same luncheon, Carrie Kennedy, one of the children, came up to me and said, Miss Harris, do you live in a teepee? And I said, Ethel, what are you teaching your children? And I said, no, honey, come and sit. So I set her on my lap and I told her how I lived and said, but we used to, and that's my history. And, you know, that was all right to have made a mistake. So when I left, she made a little card. Last month, she called me and she was doing something about her father, and she wanted my opinion on something she was exploring to publicize. Sorry. So then when jumping back to grandmother's visit, she met all the members of the Senate, and that was great fun. We had made arrangements to go to the White House. My mother was with her as well, and so my mother and grandmother went, and Catherine, my oldest daughter, and Fred said, y'all are just getting too much publicity. I'm going to go with you. Go with you to the White House. And I said, okay, come on. We went, and she was so gracious. Lady Bird gave us a tour of the White House, and we have an official photographer of 3 generations of Comanches in the White House. And then the press said, we'd like to interview your grandmother. I said, well, let me ask her. And I said, Grandma, if they want to interview you. And she said, I don't know. I said, you're so smart. You know all about politics. We talk about Adlai Stevenson. Fred can understand that Grandpa couldn't read because he would talk about all people who's running for office. So I said, you do well. And she said, will you help me? I said, sure, I'll be right there with you if I have to clarify. She was just the greatest hit. They interviewed her about this and that. One person asked, well, Ms. Tabatabai, you met with the Senate, you met the Vice President, you went to the White House. What impressed you the most? And she thought just a moment. She didn't look at me for help or anything. She said, all these trees. So she coming from southwestern Oklahoma, trees are just on the creeks. She said, all these trees in Washington. They just thought she was marvelous. And then we had tea with the Kennedy children. And Carrie Kennedy, Kaku asked more questions. And all the kids were there with their dogs. Ethel had it especially for the kids. Carrie said, well, Miss Tabatabai, would you give me a Comanche name? So she named her the one who always asked questions. And today, Carrie Kennedy can say her Comanche name.
Isn't that cute?
And we took grandmother to the National Arboretum, and she took cuttings. And I said, this is a federal garden. We're going to get arrested. And she always did. Wherever she went, she took these cuttings. She carried a man handkerchief where she tied her coins on one corner. She dipped it in the pond and dampened the handkerchief and put these little cuttings to take back to Oklahoma, see if she could get them to grow.
I just want to mention, you've alluded to it, but you were the first Senate wife to testify before Congress, who gets a lot of attention. Speaker of the House from our great state, Carl Elbert, was helpful to you?
No, absolutely. He was going to let me get hurt. I've watched hundreds of sessions, but I've not ever participated, and I didn't know if I'd be knowledgeable enough if they asked me some real hard questions, but I gave examples that I knew. And the war on poverty was helping, and I told them about what we did in Oklahoma and that we used that money and how the tribes on the eastern side of the state elected their own officials and became now the largest contributors to the state of Oklahoma. And I said, that's what can be done when you have good programs like this. Carl was there, and he was so nice. I asked Fred, he said, just don't embarrass me. So I said, okay, I won't. So Carl came over anyway, and afterwards Shriver sent me a bouquet of roses with a note.
And the note said, to the lady that made the house a home for the poor.
Yes.
Isn't that a great line?
It is. He's so pretty.
How good you must have felt about yourself. Did you read a speech?
No.
You didn't do any reading. You were dyslexic, and I was wondering how that went.
I can't read a speech. So I can make points, reference points, and I can go from there. But yes, that's always been a disability.
I wanted to point this out. You and Fred helped the Taos Pueblo Indians retrieve their Taos Blue Lake, and President Nixon is part of this story. Mm-hmm. Tell us the story.
Well, I have to tell a little bit. Fred and I entertained White House Fellows. It's a group of young people that are selected around the country to work in Washington at different departments. And they're called White House Fellows, all of them are, wherever they wind up. Well, we, for a couple of years, had invited them to the house and have some refreshments for them and let them ask us questions. There was a young woman there, Bobby Green Kilberg. She wasn't married at the time. Bobby Green, and she was appointed to the White House. Just out of that little one meeting, she called me and she said, I want to have another visit with you. So she adopted me as her mother. That's an Indian way, too. She had worked on the Navajo as a young lawyer. So when the legislation came up, Fred was really working hard. And of course, Clinton Anderson was a very well-known senator with a lot of prestige. He was the head of the committee that the legislation had to come out of. So there was no chance of getting it out, we were told. In visiting with her, she was saying, I know that y'all are working on the Taos Blue Lake, and said, why don't you come and talk to the president? I thought, well, Nixon? I'm being an old Democrat. She said, we'll see what we can work out. So I said, okay, let's try it. She talked to the president, and he assigned Lynn Garment, one of his top advisors, to meet with me. I won him over. We stayed friends forever. So he said, okay, the president told me to make the decision. So I took that information and ran and made it bipartisan. Also, I worked on my groups of women and religious group, my civil rights, made it a civil rights issue, a religious issue, and a Native American issue so that it just wouldn't get stuck. Fred held up all the laws that were coming that couldn't come on the floor until they voted on the Taos Blue Lake. And that was when the people from Washington said that was a strong, hard thing to do because he was bucking against a really well-known senator. And the senator said to his Fred, we don't mess with your Indians in Oklahoma and you shouldn't mess with mine. And Fred said, they're not yours, Senator. Because they were treating us in the Department of Interior like natural resources.
Yeah.
We were the only human program in the Department of Interior. So that's one of the agencies we helped change.
But Nixon did help.
Oh, yes.
Did you meet with him then?
Oh, yes.
And how did that go?
Oh, it was wonderful. He was so proud. He said he was going to sign the bill, and we had a ceremony in the White House, and it was during Christmas time. It was just beautiful. I get emotional just thinking about it. Bobby was there, and all of the people that helped us was there, and the Taos people came, and we sat between them and the Secretary of Interior. He signed the bill, and he said the most wonderful things. It's on our film about how all the Taos people had lived there, and this was their sacred place, and said, it's a great thing here at Christmas time. We're giving back their land, and he was proud he did it. Fred, though, he said, do I have to give Fred Harris a pen?
But what a wonderful moment that was.
It was.
And all these things that you've been organizing and doing paid off.
Yes,
didn't it?
That had a ripple effect. You know, they had a termination philosophy of the government that terminate tribes and make them not a tribe. And the Menominees had been treated that way. So they were trying to get back their tribal government. We got involved in that and was able to be helpful. And Ada Deer, who's coming to Oklahoma next week, I'm going to host her. She's staying with me. She was a young Menominee woman who came and lobbied the Congress. She stayed with us. We had receptions for them. The success of the Taos thing made the Menominee thing, and then the Alaskan claims was the third big issue. So it just was a ripple effect. People had more courage and confidence that maybe they could bring about change.
While you were in Washington, President Johnson was jealous of the relationship you and Fred had with the Kennedys.
Oh, yes.
Had that war going
bless his
on.
heart.
And one journalist said of Fred, he was the only person in Washington who could have breakfast with Lyndon Johnson, lunch with Hubert Humphrey, and dinner with Robert Kennedy.
That's right. It was like that. And Humphrey, Vice President, was our mentor, really. He took us, we went to Korea with he and his wife on an international trip in Germany. He just did special things. Every Oklahoman that came, I gave tours of the office buildings, and if he were there, he'd come out and take pictures with him. If he wasn't there, the staff would make over us, and Many times he'd call Fred and say, I've got a good-looking woman here. I'm going to go have dinner. You want to join us? So Fred would come and we'd have dinner. I mean, whatever his assignment was for the evening, we'd go and participate in it. It was just a marvelous life.
I grew up in North Dakota, in eastern and Minnesota, and they were back and forth, and Hubert Humphrey was bigger than life to us then and still was till he died, as a matter of fact. I'm going to jump ahead here. 1968, President Johnson does not run for re-election, and Hubert Humphrey runs for president. Fred and Fritz Mondale are campaign chairs. Catherine was at Harvard at that time in 68, and she became part of the anti-war demonstration. As we know, Vietnam was so divisive, and right now,
watching them.
Ken Burns' documentaries on Vietnam are going on right now. But the kids would come to your house. They wrote their telephone numbers on their arms. Tell us about that experience.
I was quite moved by it. And Catherine said she was coming to participate in the march. She said, can I bring some friends? Because they don't have places to stay. And I said, sure. So they made beds throughout the house, on the floor, or whatever we could make do. And then the next morning, they got up, we fed them breakfast, and they were putting their names and phone numbers on their arms and had their handkerchiefs and put Vaseline on their face. Put that in a little bag so if they were tear gas, they could. Oh, that was the atmosphere.
That moves you right now, doesn't it? Yeah. They went out to be attacked by their own government.
Yes. And of course, Kent State had happened, so they could expect anything.
Yeah. Hubert Humphrey considered Fred for vice president, and then he ultimately chose Ed Muskie. But Fred talked about how Humphrey would go between the two rooms. You were there.
Yes. Me and Catherine was sitting, and Byron was there too, and we were watching the demonstrations outside the hotel where the mayor was just beating the kids up, and it was awesome.
In Chicago.
Yes. Then over here with Humphrey going back and forth, and we had people telling us what was happening. So Fred couldn't take it anymore. He said, Humphrey, go ahead and take Muskie, and I would love to introduce him.
It had to be a big letdown, I would think.
It was, for all of us.
Yeah. That had to be tough to take.
It was tough, but he felt like, addressing the national convention and then also being chairman of the party was what he did instead. And I rode out with Humphrey to the convention center because he was running late. Fred was so concerned pushing him because he was about to speak at the convention center. So anyway, we drove through all of those horrible demonstrations. Just made you sick at heart.
Yeah.
Then I sat with the Humphrey family, and I remember the dress I wore. Fred was so great in introducing Muskie. And then we started a whole different life for us again with as chairman of the party.
Fred was chairman of the Democratic Party.
Democratic Party.
But you ran for president, too.
Oh, yes.
You became a candidate in 1980. Very commoner, a well-known environmentalist who would run as president, and you as vice president on the Citizens Party ticket. Weren't you really trying to start a third party?
A third party,
A little bit about that.
Well, people were getting disenchanted with Democrats and Republicans. So Barry Commoner, who was a professor, had all these wonderful ideas about the environment. They asked me to come to the Citizens Party convention. And I went with Charlie Loha, who was an Osage lawyer in Washington and Oklahoma lawyer. We went to the convention, and they wanted me to run for vice president with Barry Commoner. And I said, oh, no, I have to talk to Fred. So Fred said, well, you have to do it. I said, yes, but you will fuss about me going because we weren't separated all that much. And I said, I'll be away a lot. And he said, oh, no, you wouldn't forgive me if I said no. So I had the kids talk to him to make sure they're really saying yes. And it was awful. It was like getting out of bed and trying to run with somebody tied your shoestrings together. Him and my associate, who's running Americans for Indian Opportunity, both of them resented that I did it. I don't know what it was. And it was awful to have that on the back. And of course, we were already then public and was traveling around.
They resented that you were running.
Because of my relationship with both of them.
Yeah.
I was doing something outside of them. In OIO and AIO, Fred was always involved in it enough that he felt comfortable with all we were doing, and this was something outside of our relationship. So that kind of led to a long story, but he didn't take it very well, but we did reasonably well. I've forgotten what the percentage was, but then there were two other parties trying to start a third party too. So we kind of were going for the same vote. And it's almost impossible because every state has a different methodology to start a third party. The cost and the organization that you need, it's almost impossible to do.
When Fred lost in the primary of 76, you left Washington, you moved to New Mexico. You felt comfortable there, and Fred taught at the University of New Mexico. You'd become that candidate. But then your interests were different. Fred wanted to can tomatoes, I guess.
Yes, raise chickens.
And raise chickens in New Mexico. But you wanted to go back to Washington. That's what caused the tension and ultimately the breakdown of the marriage. True?
Yes. Well, that campaign taught me two things. I was having trouble with the campaign, and I told my daughter Catherine and my co-worker at OIO to come and say, what's wrong with this? Something's not quite right of how they're using me. They're not using me well. After they sat for a while, I said, well, what do y'all think? I feel kind of excluded from some of the decision making. I said, they're treating me like a president's wife. And they said, well, you're acting like it. So that's when I got more aggressive in the campaign. Then the next thing was we had organized the Council of Energy Resource Tribe. And I was traveling around the country talking to the tribes about what they could do and having these seminars about how to get control of their own natural resources. And we set up the council. Out of that activity, we set up the Council of Energy Resource Tribe, and we got the federal government all changed around to be involved in it, and the tribes' right to negotiate their own deals because we found out they were the worst. With the federal government negotiating for us, we were the worst contracts in the world, not just in the United States, but in the world. So we got some learned people from a couple of universities and had these forums to educate the tribes. And the tribe, it was hard for them to say, well, we can't do that. The Bureau won't let us. I said, y'all are the owners of this. You can do what you want to do. You can even say, get the heck out of here, BIA. But you may need them because the BIA were not that sophisticated anyway. It wasn't that they were, I don't think, hopefully, trying to cheat the tribes, but they were not sophisticated. Here comes the international corporation with 10 lawyers, and they just browbeat these guys into anything and then give them front money, which was to the tribal people that had to make the decision, along with the Bureau's recommendation. It's just wonderful what you see happening with the tribes now. The Utes was one of our main tribes. Now they've got a hotel in the middle of Denver. Everybody used what we taught. It lived for about 10 years, and then everybody learned how to manage their own affairs, and they didn't need counsel anymore. Peter McDonald was in charge of it when he was in his heyday. He was the chair of it. Oh, it worked out beautifully, so that lots of wonderful things happened, and they all renegotiated their agreements with these companies. And we did timber tribes. We brought specialists in because the timber companies were just coming and clear cutting, and they weren't reforesting, particularly in the Northwest. So we did a whole bunch of things, and then all of a sudden you saw the environment. What are you going to do for the environment? We didn't have any protection. We did the federal government, so I worked with, she became my dearest friend, still is. She was second in command of EPA. So went to her and she said, I'll just make administrative decision. Tribes can create their own environmental standards. So the tribes have higher environmental standards than the state or city that they're close to. So that has worked out. And that was happening. We were successful. Everything was going well. So I wasn't paying attention. And I knew in my head that when he stepped down from all of that adoration of Senate, they were going to be in trouble. And I was watching for it. And then I just, before all of this, the head of the energy department, because that was one of the departments we were changing their attitude and their relationship with the tribe, he asked me to come to Washington and be the tribal. And Fred just kind of blew up, and he hurt my feelings so bad I ran away from home. He said, I shouldn't say, he said that it's only because he was interested in me physically. And I said, all this time you've complimented me on how.
Yeah.
So anyway, I ran away from home for about a day, came back, and it was just kind of that tension. And I know it was that he was going to be hard. He was building a garden. He had bought a calf, and we had to go to court over it, and the pig, and we had chickens and a duck. And we had this beautiful place on the Rio Grande River, Bosque.
But That was tough to go through that divorce, but you went to Washington, and for 10 years, to bring it around to present day, you and Fred have a good relationship today, and with his wife, Margaret.
Yes.
And you have a grandchild.
Yes, great-grandchild.
Great-grandchild brings everybody together.
Yes.
So the two of you can reminisce about old times, and it's a whole big family that gets together.
Yes, it's just a wonderful relationship now. Because it was so good and rich throughout our lives, I guess I didn't need him as much. Yeah. I found my own voice, because he was my voice.
Yeah.
And because of my dyslexia, that's part of my thing. I have to get to know people, and I can't read a speech, for one thing.
Yeah.
So he was my voice, and I gradually got independent of it, I guess.
Yeah, you grew. And you must be a great example to women who listen to your story, that they maybe at one time been shy and retiring, but they found their voice, maybe by listening to you. You ran with some pretty stout women. In 71, you along with Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, Fannie Lou Hamer, Shirley Chisholm, Bella Abzug formed the National Women's Political Caucus.
Yes.
I mean, you were finding your voice big time with them, weren't you?
Yes, that helped. It helped a lot.
Names. Angie DeBow, Oklahoma's great historian. Yes. She wrote the book, Still Waters Run Deep. She wrote about the injustice and unfair treatment of Oklahoma Indians, and named names of known Indians and how they had taken advantage of children, adults, in their land allotments. I just wanted to insert her name because she was so great.
Yes.
And Scott Momaday.
Oh, yes.
You know him,
yes.
Writer, artist, teacher.
When he got the Pulitzer Prize, we had a book party for him in Washington, D.C., and then he invited us to New York when he received it. So we were with him.
Great.
And he's still a beautiful friend of mine. He's not as well as he was, but he's still there.
And we have him in his oral history on our website, voicesofoklahoma.com. Quickly, the status of Native Americans, status of the Comanche Nation today, 2017. How would you describe it?
Oh, it's just decades of growth and changing things. The way that we were set up, the governments that were imposed on us, the way we governed ourselves created a lot of internal problems. We've looked at that. The eastern Oklahoma was so poor when we started Oklahomans for Indian Opportunity. Now they're the second largest contribution of resources or monies to the state. So everything's changed. It's a whole different world. People are going to college, they're graduating, tribes are having tribal colleges. All of that is looking to education as one of the arrows you need for your bow. It's changing. It's so radically changed. And that's why we started the Ambassadors Program. Because in those 60s, I had this network of people who had been in the war and poverty programs. We could work with them, and that's how we got so many things done. We don't have that now, so we looked at and we choose young people from 20 to 35 years old to be ambassador. We give them some philosophy. We take them to Washington, D.C. to understand the culture there. We take them on an international trip. And as of this year, half of our class is indigenous people from the U.S. and the other half is from the world. We have Japanese, we have Australian, and of course in New Zealand we are a sister organization in New Zealand, Bolivia, Peru. Really active down there. Just so much because Bolivia has an Indian president and we've gone to his inaugurations. We want to be global as well as improving nationally, be part of the global economy.
Pointing out from the 60s to today, the component of casinos came in. Is that good? Is that bad? Does it have both sides? What is your view?
Well, philosophically, I'm against any kind of gaming operation to support your government. But I would fight for the tribes to do that. And they've done it so well. It's beyond belief. Those tribes that we didn't even know about in California had just come up, and now they're both an economic force as well as a political force. There's problems with it still. Some tribes have disenrolled some of their members because they're getting a little greedy. That's some of the shameful things that comes with it. If people try to ooze people out of their community, they're really losing something terrible when they take that attitude. And that does drive people to, because the gaming is owned by the tribe, by all the population. Every citizen of that tribe is the owner of that operation. And has to be well managed. And apparently they've done so well here in eastern Oklahoma. better than we have on the western side. We have small operations. Comanches have 2 operations instead of focusing on one and make it as attractive as the tribes have here on the eastern
Here we
side.
have the Creeks and their Spirit Casino, and the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, Cherokees.
Yes. They're reinvesting, and that's why they've been so...
And they're actually building roads beyond
and
the
hospitals,
ground.
yes.
And hospitals.
And
so
hospitals.
It is good. And buying back land that was probably taken from them one day.
That's the most wonderful thing. And you just see this nationwide. The world has changed here, too, in such a wonderful way. And so that... Oh, it's just amazing to talk to young people now. They're all talking about going to school, they're going to college, they're getting careers. We're encouraging them to look internationally as well about the possibilities of working internationally. And also, we want to be a part of solutions because we've been viewed as an Indian problem all our lives. And now we're part of the solution, as the tribes here in Oklahoma have done. They are now part of the economy. They're part of creating new things. That has all changed, and hopefully we've changed enough just keeping ahead of what's happening as we're doing with our international. And that's exciting. We've all learned from each other. Peru and Bolivia, corporations are coming down because all of the new finds are on indigenous land. We have to learn to use indigenous so that they're having struggles that we had early on with companies. They've invited us down to speak about it, and I've taken a couple of people from here to go with me to tell them how we organize the Council of Energy Resource Tribes and how to negotiate with the government, get them on your side and help them see it's in their self-interest that the tribe does well and not just be exploited.
I know you laid a lot of groundwork leading up to this era, that you have Native Americans coming up to you and say what you did.
I know. Last night.
We're both getting tears right now. What you did for them. They're stronger today. Their children are stronger today. Isn't that true?
Last night they came up and cried. They were so happy to see me. It was just a loving.
Here on campus at the University of Tulsa, and you showed Indian 101, which is a great documentary. I have it. And so they did come up to you and talk to you. Here's another name that you must respect, and that's Wilma Mankiller.
Oh, yes. Oh, I knew her well. In the last stages of her life, I was part of it. And, of course, the Cherokees remembered that I helped them be able to elect their own officials. So they honored me in a parade and stayed at her house, and it was a wonderful occasion. I knew them, but not as well as I continue to work with her husband.
Yes, Charlie So.
Charlie So.
We have her also on voicesofoklahoma.com.
Good.
I just wanted to mention the current edition of Time Magazine, September 18th, 2017. First, Women Who Are Changing the World. And it has 50 women in here who were the first in many of their areas. And so were you, a first. Could have been almost a first lady maybe too, But then one of the reasons you're in Oklahoma is you're receiving the Changing World Prize presented by the Woody Guthrie Center, and you'll be doing that Sunday night. You served as an honorary co-chair for the Women's March in Washington in January. That's one of the reasons they're honoring you. As an advocate for equality, peace, and social justice, Ms. Harris follows in the footsteps of Woody Guthrie as a guiding force for positive change in our world. Among your many, many honors, you're giving this honor as well. Isn't that special?
Oh, it is wonderful because we followed his life and know his son, Arlo, very well. He's one of our champions. It's always been. So it's even a bigger honor because of that. We admired him so.
Can you even say, as you look back, an accomplishment that you're the most proud of, or several?
I guess starting Oklahomans for Indian Opportunity led me to do all these national things and international things now. That experience was so rewarding, and I learned from the people I met. It makes you conscious that, as we say now at this period of our history, that we want to be at the table when they negotiate. We're negotiating on resources or trade or those kinds of things, but we're not negotiating on how to get along with each other. So in our ambassadors program, we're training that they can be diplomats to be able to negotiate things that have wealth for all people, following their own cultural values because we're one with nature. And as the president of Bolivia, who is indigenous himself, says he has an empty chair in his cabinet, the chair for Mother Nature. So they're using their cultural values because we think that we're related to all things, rocks and mountains, peaks. We know that we have the DNA of the stardust. So that even before the Anglo scientists discovered it, we said that long ago. Our relationship with all things, we must remember that now as we meet international people, that we're related to them, and we're always been embraced by Indigenous people worldwide. It's been a wonderful experience going with the Ainus of Japan, for instance, who just got recognized by the Japanese government that they're Indigenous people. They would never say that before. And now they're saying it, and now they come and be a part of our program as well as inviting us to Japan.
Explain that term, Indigenous people. What does that mean?
Indian people,
right.
Native people.
But Japanese are using that as well.
Yes, it's first people.
People to that land.
And now we've got a voice at the UN. We're part of the UN that takes our grievances and helps us publicize them. We learn about each other. I've just got the magazine that we're part of, reading about what events are happening in Guatemala, what's happening in South America, as well as Africa and India. Indigenous people are finding their voice because they've been colonialized so long. It's really amazing in some of the countries where the colonial government had them, never dealt with them exactly. They were just kind of on their own, or they're always outside of everything. And that was true in Bolivia. They're 85% of the population, and they were ruled by this upper class group of Spanish descendants. So finally, when that government decided they were going to privatize water, the Indian people said, you can't privatize water. Water is life. No one can own water. It's for everybody. So they demonstrated for about 2 years, and finally the government resigned and they elected an Indigenous person as the president. So that's what's happening around the world. It's really been remarkable.
It's remarkable, as I've been listening to you, to remember that you're 86 years old. You don't seem to be 86, and I don't know what they are supposed to be, but I've seen people who are 66 who seem to be older than you, and you've been blessed. I think you referred to earlier, Comanches lived to be long livers, as we say, and that's in your DNA.
Yes.
And forefathers lived to be at least that age and into their 90s.
Mm-hmm. My grandfather was 90, so we have a good lineage. My grandmother was 88, I think, when she fell and kind of set her back some, but all of that energy I inherited from them.
Yes, and you displayed that today. So then, how would you like to be remembered?
That I love people, and I believe everybody has medicine, which if you get to know them, that you can benefit from knowing them. It's what I strive for and what I live off of. It's what keeps me young.
Yeah, young is for sure. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.
It was very nice of you to share this today. I appreciate it very much.